Welcome everyone, this is Viking, and today we're going to take a look at the non-combat aspects of the Spitfire, from startup to takeoff to a little bit of navigation and flying around to landing. So, first things first, make sure the controls are centered. If you want cockpit lighting, the knobs for that are here. It's broad daylight, so I'm going to leave them off, but that's where they are. This thing is optional. It's the filter for the intake. You're supposed to turn it on when it's forward position, when you're on the ground to protect the engine from debris. And once you're airborne, if you leave it on, nothing really bad is going to happen, but you're going to lose a little horsepower. I've never actually had anything bad happen when I forgot to touch this in the first place, so you can just forget about it if you want, but I'm going to try and demonstrate everything here. We push the RPM lever all the way forward, pressurize the fuel tank, and then we advance the throttle just enough to make this light come on. There it is. And then we pull the throttle all the way back. I'm going to pull up the control overlay because once you've pulled it back, you also need to advance it the tiniest amount that you're capable of advancing it. You need a little bit, but it's easy to overdo it, so smallest possible adjustment you can make there. I often forget to do things like flaps and trim if I leave it until I'm on the taxiway. So I like to do that ahead of time. Flaps down, navigation lights on, yeah, down position is on. They're glowing. It's for real. I've got the preset for ATC on my A channel. So if I were doing an actual flight, I would use that to contact the runway, but I don't want them talking over top of me on a video, so I'm leaving the radio off. All of these are presets. There's no way to dial in a manual frequency. The mission editor gets to tell you what your radio frequencies are. You have no choice. Now, this light needs to be gotten rid of. It means there's not enough pressure in the fuel tank. By manually clicking this thing like 20 times, you'll eventually get it to shut off. But a much easier electronic fancy whiz-bang way is to activate the fuel pump, and that didn't work for some reason. So we're going to do it the manual way. There we go. Open the fuel cock. Open the starter switches. You're going to have to bind starter and boost, or at the very least one of them, because you have to press them simultaneously, so a mouse can't do that. We're going to unscrew the primer, and we're going to give it 5 full strokes because we're pretty near sea level. If we were at higher altitude, we might go for 6, or really high altitude, even 7. It's not the end of the world if you give it that many while you're on the ground, but there will be more flames leaping out of the engine. Actually, if you think that's cool, that might even be an argument in its favor. I'm going to make sure that my rudder trim is in roughly the position I'm going to need it to be for the takeoff run and for trimmed flight. Putting the first R at 12 o'clock will get you in the ballpark. I'm going to... My pitch trim is 2 units high. I think the manual says it's supposed to be there, but everyone I know who actually flies the Spit sets it at just a hair above 1 point low digit. Turn on the magnetos. If you start your engine and then it immediately dies, that's probably what you forgot. And definitely, before you start, set the wheel brake, because idle power is enough to start dragging this thing. All right, all those ducts are in a row. Lights off. We primed the engine. We got the throttle advanced very, very slightly, the least amount we possibly can. So it's time to hold in these 2 starter switches, and then when the engine catches, you move this lever forward, the mixture control, and you release the starter switches. So starter switches, lever forward, it's humming, and that means we release the starter switches and close the covers. The oil to be safe for takeoff, the oil temperature has to be at least 20. It gets there very quickly. You're not going to be watching this one. You're going to be watching this one the radiator temperature, that one has to get to 60. Now, because it'll take a little while to warm up, I'm going to talk a bit about taxiing. Taxiing in the Spitfire is pretty difficult. MiG-21 drivers might find it familiar because it actually uses a similar system. But people who are familiar with nose wheel steering or just using left or right wheel brakes are in for a bit of a unpleasant surprise. So maybe take a shot of something, because yeah. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to bring the RPMs up a little bit, and I'm just going to pivot the aircraft in place. Not actually going to go anywhere. You don't want to let the RPMs go above 20 while the brakes are held, because that'll produce enough power to pull the airplane over its landing gear and slam the nose into the dirt, which will get you a lecture from your crew chief. Alright, so let's watch the control overlay here. This is the power to the brakes, and that's the rudder. I'm going to bring the rudder left a little bit, and watch what happens to right brake pressure. It goes away. And there comes a point where you actually start turning. And then I'm releasing it, and then it keeps going. I've released it and it keeps going because the tail wheel is off to one side. So you've actually got to counter it a little bit. See if you can... I think we're creeping forward here because I'm too close to 20. I'll actually bring that all the way down to idle. It can get pretty... And actually, that brief burst of power really pushed the temperature over 60. So if you're in a hurry, I suppose you can do that on purpose. When you have just released the brakes, there's still a little bit of pressure in the line, and it will give you a little bit of steering. It'll kind of feel like maybe your rudder's doing it. It's not your rudder, you're not going fast enough. But you do have a little bit of control still once you've released that thing. Let's taxi over to the runway, shall we? Also, I like to have the gun sight up. It's obviously not required for navigation, but I like seeing it on my HUD. We're going to pump the brakes pretty much constantly because it's very easy to get the Spitfire over its safe taxi speed. As far as I'm concerned, safe taxi means that you can stop quickly, and because of its tendency to nose over when it has any kind of momentum at all, you really want to keep it like about this slow. Just to illustrate something, I'm going to slam on the brakes for a second. Okay, I was too timid about it. I feathered it. Muscle memory, hey? But it could have lifted the tail wheel off the ground and slammed it back down again, which can decalibrate your artificial horizon, which cannot be recalibrated. Sometimes it seems like it tries to sort itself out, sometimes successfully, but basically if you make the plane bump into the ground really hard, you can wreck your artificial horizon. Let's try to line this up as well as we can. And once we have made all the steering corrections we need to make, we want to roll forward a bit to make sure that that pesky tail wheel is all straightened out. You don't have to be as timid about this as I am. I'm actually being really, really careful here. But that's mostly because I don't want to crash and wreck the video. Oh, speaking of behaving differently in videos than I do in the real game, my rig's a little underpowered, so turning off the mirror will help me hopefully give you guys the frame rate you deserve. I don't use that mirror much. It's up to you whether you think the pretty small performance impact is worth caring about. Now, we're going to confirm that... going to keep the brakes held. We're going to confirm that the flaps are down. We're going to confirm that our pitch trim is where we want it to be. We're going to confirm that our rudder trim is where we want it to be. We're going to turn on the pitot heat. You don't need it yet, but you don't want your instruments to go all wonky later if you happen to get up to altitude. With all that in place, it's time to take off. We're going to run the power up to just short of 20, release the wheel brakes, and then as we roll, continue to increase power. The tail is going to come up off the ground and the plane's going to kind of be level with the ground. When that happens, you just do a little tiny bit of backstick and it'll come into the air, and then it's wheels up, flaps up. When you do wheels and flaps up, your nose will jump up and your plane will roll left, and you just kind of fight that with the stick until you can trim it out. All right, without further ado, I forgot to close the canopy. There we go, it's kind of wings level. I've gone off the runway, which is dumb, but now we just back a little bit of backstick and we're up. Boost pressure is plus 12, that's about where we want it to be. Gear up, flaps up. Anticipate it doing that. I let that happen to sort of show what you should expect. And pitch nose down and trim rudder right. Alright, looking good. We're running the engine pretty hot right now. We're going to back the boost off first. When you're lowering power, you always back the boost off first to plus 7 and the engine RPMs to 2650. Sometimes changing the RPMs can move the boost, so confirm that it's still about where you expect it to be. And 2650 RPMs with plus 7 boost is your cruising setting. It uses a reasonable amount of fuel, gives you a reasonable amount of speed, and you can run the engine like this indefinitely without worrying about an overheat. We also want to retract the intake filter, and although I don't think most people actually carry external fuel tanks in the Spitfire, I did fit a slipper tank, and we are not drawing from it. We're currently drawing from internal fuel alone. So let's show you people how to use the external tank. Basically, this is the lever for it. It's off. We're going to go on. We're going to turn off the internal fuel, and now we are drawing from the external fuel tank. If you've done something wrong there, it'll sound like that. You'll lose power, but the engine won't die. You have a few seconds to correct your error. It's not immediately fatal. That's worth knowing because there's no way to check how full your internal or your external tank is. You find out that it's empty when the engine does what it just did, and when that happens, I'm just sort of doing a quick demo here. There's no way I'm going to actually need this external fuel. I just want to show the procedures for using it. So let's pretend that that I think my external tank is very low, or perhaps it's actually gone empty. When that happens, you shut this one off, you turn this one on, and you've switched over. If you want to ditch the tank, that drops it. Bye-bye, slipper tank. I actually can't see it falling. Alright, let's try to keep the airfield in sight so that we can find it easily when it's time to demonstrate landing. Have I already lost sight of it? It's around here somewhere. Well, regardless. I know the landmarks around here well enough that I can probably find my way back there if I just gain a little altitude. And to do that, I'm going to go from cruising power to full mill. Before I do, I'm just going to show fuel economy, though. We lower boost first because if the manifold pressure, boost, same thing. If the manifold pressure is significantly higher than it should be for a given RPM setting, you could cause your engine to seize in a matter of seconds. So we drop the boost to make sure that whatever we set it to, boost can't possibly be too high. Then take engine RPMs down to 2350. This is max fuel economy. This will move you along at about 200 knots or 220 miles per hour. The gauge is in fact in miles per hour. You got your vertical accelerometer there. So that's economy right there. We're going to put it back up to cruising speed. And we do RPMs first when we're increasing power, because once again, that means boost cannot possibly be too much. +7 is cruising. And as you can see, we're still accelerating through 240. I think it keeps you like between 260 and 280 when you're around this engine setting. Yeah, 250 right there. Then there's and the fuel economy and the cruise. We're currently on cruise. Those are safe to run indefinitely. The next one is sort of the equivalent of full mill. It's 2850 and +12. That one is safe to use for an hour. It uses up a fair bit of gas though, so because it takes an hour to overheat on this setting, heat isn't really the concern. Fuel is the concern. And there's also one more setting, basically the equivalent of full afterburner. It sends a waterfall of gas into the engine, and it is only safe to use for 5 minutes. You have to get the job done quickly when you're using full power. But boy, do you ever go fast. Look at the speedo. It's actually wrapping around, so the 60 mile an hour, the needle looks like it's pointing just shy of 60, but actually at this point we're looking at the inner ring. We're doing 310 miles per hour. And I'm going to back that off by bringing boost down to 12 and engine RPMs down to 2850. Back at the full mill setting that we are going to use for climbing. Optimal climb in the Spitfire is basically whatever gives you 180 miles per hour of airspeed. Right now we're climbing at 4,000 feet per minute, possibly more because I think the needle is pegged. It is in fact pegged. But we're also losing speed like crazy. And we need to put in some right rudder trim. As our speed gets near 180, I'm going to drop the nose a little bit and try to maintain that 180 speed. Generally about 3,000 feet per minute is going to be roughly your sustainable max climb. On the way up, we will eventually notice that our boost pressure is falling without us ever touching the throttle. Always a good idea to keep an eye on the heat gauge. You don't want the oil temperature to reach 100 if you can avoid it, but the radiator temperature is the real tricky one. If it goes over 130, back off. Find a way to cool your aircraft. Trying to eyeball Biggin Hill. Boy, you can really see where the texture's cut off, eh? We're right on one edge of the map. That's why it looks like crap out in front of us. I'll turn it around and go the other way. We are going to climb to demonstrate the loss of boost pressure, which is already occurring. We're down to like 11 from 12, and I haven't touched the throttle. But we're also going to take a moment to look at the backwards compass. Once you're used to it, it'll be fine. But here, let's move 15 away from dead center. So now we're at a heading of 140 or thereabouts. But wait, you say, isn't it 160? Because it's to the right of the 15? No, it looks like on the compass that we turn left to go to 150. So let's turn left. Nope, wrong way. The compass is backwards. Alright, I lost a little altitude demonstrating that, so we'll go back up to our sustained climb. We're going to keep it a little bit above 3,000 feet per minute because it's fine to lose speed down to 180. Spitfire is a very good climber. I wonder if there's anything else I can talk about to fill the dead air. It's going to take us a while to get to altitude. Basically, what's going to happen is that as we climb, we lose boost pressure to the point where we just can't really maintain it anymore, and that's when the supercharger kicks in automatically. You'll see a bright light come on here. It's different from the fuel pressure problem light here. This one just means your supercharger's on. This one means you don't have enough fuel pressure, and your engine could stop working. It's nice that the artificial horizon is still working. Like I say, oh, there we go, supercharger. And suddenly we're able to maintain the plus 12 again. So now we've reached a comfortable altitude. But for a little while we were at an uncomfortable altitude where our engine was underpowered and no amount of throttle movement would have done a thing about it. If you find that you can't maintain boost pressure, climb or dive, because you're not in the right space to be at your most effective. Also, remembering that having an excessive boost pressure can damage the engine very quickly, it's worth remembering that as you descend, your supercharger will kick out. Here, let me try and illustrate this. Let's build up some speed in a dive. Also, let's not go quite so south. Let's head northeast, in the hopes that I can find a landmark that will bring me back to the airfield. Of course, there's no shame in using the F10 map, but not every server will even let you, so learning to navigate by landmarks is a good idea. If you put too much pitch down too quickly on the Spit, its engine can stutter for a minute, and it can make you think you're out of gas. Level off before you assume your fuel tank is empty. All right, so the supercharger's off. Now, if I had the boost at plus 7, and I had a lower RPM, here, let's see if we can. Nope, couldn't make the engine do its thing, but it will sometimes do that. As we dive, the pressure is increasing without us touching the throttle to plus 8, and in some situations, especially if you're like right beneath supercharger altitude, and you firewalled the throttle just to get it to maintain plus 7, and then all of a sudden you either go into supercharger level and it goes bam and it really alerts you, then that kind of that's a bit less dangerous in my opinion, because you realize that your boost has gone way up, and you'll take care of it right away. But when you're diving, boost increases gradually, and you may not notice that you have the manifold pressure way too high for the engine RPMs. Let's now try and find our way back to Biggin Hill without using the F10 map if we can. I recognize this river here. I don't actually know what things are called, but I remember seeing them. If we follow this guy around to where he turns left, and then it sort of comes to a tip where it narrows into a much smaller body of water that's much harder to see. I mean, I guess it doesn't technically end, but it in terms of what it looks like it ends at a certain point, and that point is just a little bit east-northeast of Biggin Hill. Want to maintain enough altitude to be able to see the terrain, but not so much that we lose the details. Let me see. Oh, there it is. That's Biggin Hill. So I'm going to sort of note that these 4 fields are kind of conspicuous. I'm going to fly around them to the far side, turn south, and that'll let us come in for a landing. Since we're coming in for a landing, I want to bleed off a little bit of speed ahead of time, so we will take this thing down to fuel economy. And yeah, speaking of fuel, you have 2 internal tanks, and only one of them has a gauge. And you have to push a button to show that your small tank is in fact full. The small tank carries about 40% of your fuel. The big one carries about 60%. So if your fuel gauge reads full, that means you have at least 40%. If you have more than 40%, you're not allowed to know how much fuel you have. I'm going to be doing the combat video shortly. And since I won't want to do this then, I'm also just going to fire these guns dry. 30 cals. Say, Master Arm, 30 cals. Change in tone, and we're done. I timed this before, and it was about 22 seconds if I recall correctly. 20 mil. That's about 11 seconds. And I demonstrate that here because there is no ammo gauge in the Spitfire. You have to keep sort of a mental tally of how many seconds of fire each gun has already delivered. A proper pilot would likely do a proper pattern landing, but I rarely stand on ceremony, so I'm going to see if I can just slow down enough. I probably can't. I'm probably going too fast. You know what? Instead of actually doing a pattern, let's just do a tight little loop to bleed off that airspeed. We're under 160. Flaps are good to go at 150. So, whoops, now we're over 160. I gave it too much juice. 150. Flaps down, gear down. And remember that those 2 things will definitely impact the trim. You want to keep your speed at 120 on approach. And then as you get closer, let it fall to 100. And then just barely touch down at 80. The throttle is very sensitive at the low range like this. And also I'm trimming a fair bit as we approach. But I'm really keeping an eye on the speedo, because if it goes below 100, you could have a real problem. Not quite lined up here. And there we go. I like to put the crosshair on the far end of the runway. Alright, we're getting pretty close. I'm going to let the speed go down to 100. And then cut throttle. You're going to have to go a little bit nose high to touch down gently. And you basically want to hover above the runway and basically stall down onto it. And then I like to raise my flaps very quickly so that I'm less prone to bouncing. Easy on the wheel brakes. Get the engine up to its idle speed just a little tiny bit forward. Going to try and steer back into the middle. And now we're going slowly enough that I'm less concerned about face planting when I use too much brakes. And right now we're doing about the speed we need to be doing to do a neat little pirouette and face the other way. Ah, I was doing it too fast and I dragged it wing. That's what I get for trying to be fancy at the end of a video that went very well up to that point. Well, I shall have to forgive myself. That to cut off shuts down your engine. For safety's sake, fuel line cutoff. And when manipulating the canopy, remember, the black thing is canopy open close. The red thing is jettison canopy. Don't hit the wrong thing. And there we go. The next video will be on combat. Not really my forte, but I get by. This was the non-combat stuff. I hope I hit all the points that I meant to. Should be enough to get someone going in the Spitfire. Thanks for watching, everyone. Cheers.